All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Donald Trump is threatening to bomb civilian infrastructure in Iran if Iran continues to strike ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The Houthis in Yemen are threatening to get involved in this conflict by blocking the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, which would cause more pain to the already struggling global oil markets. And Pete Hegseth yesterday in his Senate hearing to try and get a $88 billion budget to continue this war, he was really struggling to explain how it's possible that the military we were told was completely destroyed, the Iranians, have managed to kill more U.S. troops in recent days. So all of this and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
We must take back our cities and take back our culture and take back our country.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
There is a yearning in this country for somebody who will vote for principles over party.
The people of this country want what they want, and they're not getting it. None of the wars we've went to over the past 20 years have been essential or necessary at all. They've all been wars of choice. They convince you that you are the government. They convince you that their war efforts are your war efforts. And our politicians are more focused on wars abroad than the money at home. That's the truth. The government is the problem. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you could please go down below this video here on YouTube and hit like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, Spotify, and my Substack and giving all of those a follow, I'd really appreciate that. There's a lot of great content on those daily, so be sure to check those out. And also, if you haven't already seen, I got a couple articles published this week, one on antiwar.com, and then one, my first, on the Mises Institute's website, Mises.org. The antiwar.com one was published on Monday, and that one discussed the American soul and how endless wars, and in particular this war, have caused grave damage to the national soul by desensitizing us to death and destruction abroad, and causing our government to shift its focus from ensuring our liberties to forcing democracy and global liberalism on the rest of the world. So that's an article that came out on Monday. Be sure to check that out. And then the Mises Institute one, the one that went out today, actually, here on Wednesday, that one focuses on how our economic struggles in this country are largely at the feet of cronyism and not free market capitalism, and how the democratic socialists in particular falsely label a lot of the activities of our government as engaging in capitalism, when really it's quite the opposite. It's a really corporatized form of socialism. So be sure to check that out as well. I really appreciate both of these websites for publishing my work, and they are both incredible websites, so be sure to check out the rest of the work those websites do as well. Again, antiwar.com and Mises.org. So that's that. Let's move on to the news now. This is the news of the day. The war in Iran continues to escalate. It has for the last week, roughly. The United States is bombing the southwest portion of Iran for the most part, islands off the coast of Iran, and within the country on the southwest part of the country of Iran. They are bombing, they just started bombing nuclear sites again. They are bombing some civilian infrastructure. They've begun the process of bombing some bridges. They're bombing, once again, these missile launch platforms on the coastline of Iran, many of which have already been bombed, and they are literally bombing for a second time. This is a bombing, Joe Kent put it correctly on Twitter today, this is a bombing campaign in search of a strategy. They're really just blowing stuff up that we've already hit in an effort to try and make something give here, because there's no sign of this war coming to any sort of conclusion that doesn't result in the complete and total capitulation of one side or the other. And right now, it's not looking very promising for the United States. And we'll get into this later with Pete Hegseth's hearing in the Senate yesterday. But none of the objectives, as I've made clear over the past couple episodes, not a single one of the objectives that we went into this war to achieve has been achieved. Literally none of them. Not nuclear, not missiles and drones, not proxies. And now the new one, the Strait of Hormuz, that one's worse than ever. The Iranians have enacted control of the Strait of Hormuz and are bombing ships that don't comply with their very strict regulations, that don't communicate with the IRGC before going forward. They bombed multiple ships yesterday, and they're not deterred by these strikes by the United States on their coastline, and their missile supply has not been damaged to any significant degree. Again, to the contrary of what Pete Hegseth has been claiming for months now, which is that the missile supply has been destroyed, that the drones have been destroyed. There's no evidence of that, and there's evidence to the contrary. They continue to strike the Strait of Hormuz, and they've been able to strike and do severe damage to U.S. bases in Jordan, in northeast Iraq. They've done a lot of damage in the Gulf countries as well, in Bahrain and Kuwait in the last couple days. So wherever we'd like to see the evidence, please, from Pete Hegseth that the missile supply and the drone supply from the Iranians has been dealt any severe blow. Because right now, all we're seeing is these Gulf states, once again, like we saw at the beginning of this war, up in flames and economic calamity as a result. But let's get into this here. This is Trump's threat. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Trump is now threatening to up the escalation once again, and just another sign that they are planning some major escalation here because nothing is giving with these limited strikes in the southwest of Iran. And this is Donald Trump just today, just this morning, threatening to bomb power plants and bridges once again, as he did back in April on Easter. He threatened to bomb bridges and power plants in Iran, civilian infrastructure, blatant moral crimes, war crimes. He's threatening that once again today. He says, quote, this is the Wall Street Journal, President Trump threatened to destroy Iranian infrastructure if Iran attacks vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz, in the latest sign he's planning to escalate the conflict. Trump wrote on Truth Social on Wednesday that the U.S. will, quote, bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant, including infrastructure in or near Tehran, every time Iran shoots at a ship in the strait. The president's comments are the latest indication that the two countries might return to full-scale war. On Tuesday, he said the U.S. military forces would likely attack Iran's Pickaxe Mountain, the underground site where Israeli intelligence believes Iran has buried advanced nuclear enrichment centrifuges, quote, pretty soon. Trump's threats come days after Iran launched a barrage of missiles and drone attacks against U.S. bases in Jordan. 3 soldiers were killed in the strike that hit containerized housing units where the troops lived and slept. A 4th service member was killed last week in Iraq during a controlled detonation of an unexploded ordnance from a downed Iranian drone. Since then, the U.S. military has launched multiple rounds of strikes that officials said were intended to degrade Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping in the strait. So we're 5 months into this war. 5 months as of a couple weeks ago. It's now July. The war began on February 28th. And we're still expected to believe this story that any day now, we're gonna completely degrade the ability of the Iranians to control the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump, he maintains the ability at any time, according to his statements, according to Pete Hegseth, to retain control of the strait. We are in control of the strait, they're saying. And we're going to continue these strikes on the coastline of Iran, apparently, to degrade Iran's ability to launch missiles into the Strait of Hormuz. This makes literally no sense just logically on its face, without even looking at the facts, which also don't help their case. Logically, if it were the case that Trump maintains this ability like as if he's some Swiss Army knife who can flip this out at any moment, to retain control of the Strait of Hormuz, to wrestle it back using the U.S. military, using the U.S. Navy, then why would we have voluntarily, if this were true, I mean, he was voluntarily for the past 5 months allowing the global economy, the global oil supply, to experience this massive shortage, this massive squeeze on the energy supply, and deal severe damage to the Republicans' midterm chances, deal severe damage to the U.S. strategic petroleum reserves. They're almost empty at this point. And Europe is mad at us for this. We've literally had to get to the point of desperation where we were earlier on in this war, allowing Russia to sell their oil once again to Europe, as we're in the middle of this war with them in Ukraine. And the Pacific countries, Japan, Korea, South Korea, were very upset with us for this because this hurt their energy supplies. We're supposed to believe, after all this, after all the pain and political capital that was spent on this war, economically, militarily, that all this time Trump could have just voluntarily put in the military and gotten the Strait of Hormuz back under American control and back open to the ships of the world. That makes literally no sense on its face, and it's just not true. I've done my work on this show showcasing very clearly, based on all the publicly available evidence over the course of this war, that Iran maintains its ability to control the strait because of their supply of missiles and drones on their coastline, that they're able to shoot at ships at will. They can do this to whatever ship they want in the Strait of Hormuz that does not follow the guidelines they've set. And by the way, the MOU that the United States signed a couple weeks ago and now has backed out of stated very clearly that governance of the Strait of Hormuz would be determined between Oman and Iran. Those two countries, on opposite sides, the north and the south of the Strait of Hormuz, would determine the governance of the strait going forward. And it was the United States, to be very clear, that stepped in as a third party and convinced the Omanis, literally went in and basically told the Omanis what to do and has told the Omanis to establish this separate passageway through the Strait of Hormuz that was not governed by the IRGC without collaboration with the IRGC, which the MOU said had a role in determining the Strait of Hormuz. The United States went in as a third party that was not included on that provision of the MOU. It didn't say the United States got to have their say in the Strait of Hormuz. They went in and manipulated the situation to the point where Iran felt it was a violation. So instead of just letting the MOU play out, the United States needed to have a way to make sure that it didn't look like a complete and total loss for them in the Strait of Hormuz. They can't allow Iran to control it. Not because it's essential to us economically or militarily that Iran not control it. They can control it. It will be just fine. It's literally only for the egos of Trump and Hegseth that they can't allow the Iranians to control the strait. Because again, it is totally fine for me and you and everyone else if Iran controlled the strait and is able to toll some ships. And who cares? It literally does not matter. They toll 1% or 2% on every ship that goes by. It's like $1 million or $2 million per ship. Who really cares? The only reason they are so hell-bent on getting the Strait of Hormuz back to being a free waterway, and they're not going to, and they've kind of acknowledged they're not going to, but the reason they're being publicly so defensive on this is because they can't allow it to seem as if there's been any loss in this war. That's why they're always making the maximalist claims that the entire Navy and the entire Air Force have been destroyed, even though those were never the things we intended on doing in this war. They're grasping at straws when they say that because there was never any risk posed to the United States by the Iranians' Air Force or their Navy. So that by them just citing that, they're grasping at straws and trying to deflect from the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is under Iranian control. Again, not because it economically hurts us, but because it deals them a blow to their ego. And it makes them look as if they lost the war, because they did. So that's the reason we are so focused on the Strait of Hormuz. And as I said in my last episode, the reason this war cannot come to an end, and the reason we're stuck in this perpetual loop of violence, is because neither side has changed their policy in the strait. The Iranians have established the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, and they are establishing this bureaucracy in the Strait of Hormuz, and they are establishing deterrence against ships going against it by striking ships in the strait that don't comply with their new guidelines, which means you have to contact the IRGC, and potentially in the future you have to commit to paying a toll. So Iran is establishing this new system of governance in the strait that means they control it, and they will dictate what ships are allowed in and out, and under what guidelines those ships can go through. The United States, on the other hand, has not changed their policy on the Strait of Hormuz either. The United States is still under the idea that we're in this to liberate the strait. Marco Rubio said again the other day that we're in this to make the Strait of Hormuz a free waterway for all ships of the world to go through. So that right there, those are two opposite sides on this issue, on the Strait of Hormuz. Those two cannot coexist. Iran, on the one hand, cannot govern the Strait of Hormuz and establish all these regulations, while on the other hand, the United States is committed to liberating the strait. Those two things cannot coexist, and therefore necessarily war is the only option, unless we want to be diplomatic about this, which neither side seems to want to do, for different reasons. Trump is not willing to be diplomatic because he's convinced he needs a military victory here. He needs a military victory. Being diplomatic will cause all the neocons and the Israelis to do what they did with this MOU and try and sabotage it, get in his ear and say it's Obama 2.0. The Israelis will continue up their attacks on Lebanon to pressure the Iranians to respond, and this war unravels again. That's what happens if he goes the diplomatic route. And if he goes the war route, well, now we are stuck in this perpetual cycle where we're bombing them a couple days. We have a 10-day ceasefire, which has been rumored. They're bombing them again. They have a 10-day ceasefire. It's this endless cycle that's never going to end without some sort of solid resolution. And on the other hand, on the Iranian side, the reason they don't want to switch their position on the Strait of Hormuz, and we've explained this in detail as well here on the show, the reason they don't want to change their position is because they're establishing deterrence. They want to make sure the United States and Israel and no other country in the world will ever try this again because of the economic pain that Iran has been able to inflict through their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, through their attacks on the ships, through the price of insurance on these ships as a result of their attacks going up, through the oil supplies of all these countries, including the United States, being drastically emptied as a result of this war. That is what they are. That's their strategy. They're establishing deterrence. Anytime America or Israel try to do this again, try to overthrow the Iranian government, they can close the Strait of Hormuz and do exactly what they did this time and inflict severe pain on the global economy. Now, the economic issue, the oil issue, will continue to be the centerpiece of this conflict, and it has been this entire time in reality, but it will continue to be as the escalation continues, and not only in the Strait of Hormuz, but potentially in the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait as well, which is on the opposite side of this conflict. It's on the west side of Saudi Arabia. Strait of Hormuz, just for reference, is on the east side of Saudi Arabia. The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait runs in between Yemen on the east and on the west, Djibouti and Eritrea. And this is what connects the Red Sea to the Arabian Sea. And this is a major port of export for the Saudis in particular, who have been using this to get their oil out of their country. The limited amount of oil that they've exported during this conflict has gone through what they've created in the middle of all this, which is the east-west pipeline. It connects from the east, from the oil that they've built up in the infrastructure on the east of their country along the Strait of Hormuz, and they've been able to ship it across this pipeline that they've built. The east-west pipeline is what it's called, to the opposite side, the west side of the country, and out the Red Sea, and been exported through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And now, in an act of escalation, and what really points to this being a regional conflict, the Iranians, in collaboration with the Houthis, have announced that the Houthis will now threaten and shoot any Saudi ship that goes through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. Now, just for reference here, the Saudis and the Houthis have been in a long-term conflict here for over a decade. The Saudis, just until about 4 years ago, were committing a genocide in Yemen in their war against the Houthis. There have been hundreds of thousands of deaths as a result of this, a lot of tens of thousands of children. The Saudis were fighting a war against the civilian population in Yemen, striking wheat silos. This just ended recently. And now, so there is a history here is the point. And we've seen in the last couple days, this happened just about a week ago, we've seen increased collaboration in the middle of all this. And this really proves how ridiculous Pete Hegseth has been acting with his rhetoric about how defeated the Iranians have been militarily. This shows the complete opposite of that. The Iranians have been trying to establish closer relations with their proxies. We've seen this in Hezbollah, in Lebanon, with Hezbollah throughout this conflict. They have stepped in to defend Hezbollah when they never did that in the past. This was the first time, I believe this is what Trita Parsi had been saying, that was the first time when they stepped in and struck Israel on Hezbollah's behalf that they'd ever done that for one of their proxies. So that was a major new precedent that had been set in Lebanon. And now we've seen this with the Houthis. We saw an Iranian helicopter try and land in the Sana'a airport in the capital of Yemen and try and establish an air bridge between Iran and Yemen, and potentially resupply the Houthis in Yemen with increased supplies, missiles, drones, to strike Saudi ships in the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And as a result of this attempted air bridge, the helicopter trying to land at the Sana'a airport, the Saudis began bombing the airport in Sana'a in Yemen. So this was a major act of escalation. That was the first shots fired by the Saudis in this current iteration of the Saudi-Yemeni conflict. And now, as a result of this, the Houthis, and as a result of the increased escalations by the United States on Iran, the Iranians have ordered the Houthis to now shoot at any Saudi ship that attempts to go through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And this causes a lot of problems for the ships, not only directly in the Red Sea, the Saudis in particular, but also the European ships, which also travel through here. This is going to result in a lot of ships needing to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, which is the southern tip of Africa. And this causes a massive strain on the global economy because this causes increases in the need for fuel, which will increase the prices of things the finished goods down the road. And this is a massive inconvenience in particular for all these countries involved that are doing the shipping through these routes. And this is just another level of economic escalation by the Iranian side, by the axis of resistance, the Houthis now in particular, that is going to pose a real problem for the ability of the United States to keep up their escalation. Because what is the main problem being faced by the United States in this conflict? It is the strain on the global economy. It's that, and this is, of course, alongside other problems like the strain on our literal military supplies, but we'll get to that in a bit. The global economy was seriously on the brink until the MOU. Trump said it himself. He said we had about 4 weeks left of strategic petroleum reserves here in the United States. And he said, you want to see bedlam? We'll just wait 4 weeks if we didn't have this MOU. Wait till we run out of the SPR, and then it'll be bedlam. He said, we'll have a literal shortage of oil in the United States. And who knows what that entails? Rationing, we'll see. And now this is what this means potentially going forward. Now it's more strain on an already very damaged global economy. a very squeezed global oil supply that can't really afford this at this point. This is just the New York Times going into more detail about the potential threat the Houthis could pose in the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. It says, quote, if the Houthis make good on their threat to blockade ships traveling to and from Saudi Arabia via the Red Sea, it would yet again upend global oil markets by compromising a crucial fallback for the Strait of Hormuz. Since the early weeks of the war in Iran, Saudi Arabia has been relying on a pipeline that bisects the country to reroute millions of barrels of oil from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea. Most of that oil gets to market via the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait in the southern end of the Red Sea, off the coast of Yemen and near territory controlled by the Iranian-backed Houthi militia. A smaller portion goes north to the Mediterranean via a pipeline that crosses Egypt or, in the case of oil-delivered fuel, via the Suez Canal. Any disruption of those alternatives would further restrict the supply of oil and fuel to a market rattled by renewed attacks on vessels in the Persian Gulf. The threats already appear to be having an impact. Two oil tankers, the Rhodos and the Xin Long Yang, that were headed towards the Bab-el-Mandeb made U-turns on Tuesday, according to maritime data via Kepler. The market is starting to show some anxiety, but the moves have been muted. Oil trades around $95 a barrel on Wednesday, up a few dollars since the militia made its threat. The risks are grave, however. If the Houthis managed to completely block Saudi Arabia from using the Red Sea, they would take roughly 4% of the world's oil off the global market. That estimate, based on shipping data from Kepler, would be in addition to the current loss of supply through the Strait of Hormuz. Given the Houthis' proximity to Bab-el-Mandeb, it would presumably be easiest for them to disrupt shipping there. Saudi Arabia has been using that choke point to export roughly 3.6 million barrels a day of oil and fuel, mostly to Asia, according to Kepler. This is up from very low levels before the war, when almost all Saudi exports passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is very important to understand because at this point, with the economic pain that we've been all very obviously seeing on the global markets with the oil shortages across the globe, throughout this war, because of the closing of 20% of the world's oil supply in the Strait of Hormuz by the Iranians, at this point, we still haven't seen the worst of it. And this has been being pushed off a little bit because of the ability of the Saudis to get a little bit of their oil out through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait by using the East-West pipeline, which they constructed. Now, and they've also been able to get some Emirati oil from the UAE. They've been able to get some oil out from these Gulf countries and the Saudis, much less than was previously being shipped out through the Strait of Hormuz, but some, at least, to cool the worst excesses of the economic pain from this war. Now, though, with the Houthis directly threatening the Saudis, any ship that goes through the Bab-el-Mandeb will be struck by Houthi missiles funded by the Iranians. Now, of course, that's going to result, as it did in the Strait of Hormuz, with any ships that go through having much more expensive insurance at the very least, and some, and as we've seen from the New York Times here, from them reporting this, multiple have already turned around and aren't going to risk this. They'll take the long way around the Cape of Good Hope, around the entire southern tip of Africa. They'd rather risk that, or they'd rather not take the risk and take the much longer route around the entire continent of Africa than risk being shot by the Houthis in the Bab-el-Mandeb. So this causes obviously a lot of problems here for the global economy. And Saudi Arabia, as it says here, is about 4% of the global oil supply. So make it 24% now if you include the Strait. That is no longer, that's a fourth. An entire quarter of the world's energy supply now, thanks to the Iranians and their militias across the region, is now restricted. And this is the big problem. The United States alone is facing pain from this. If we continue this for weeks and months to come, who knows how bad it could get. Plus, the Europeans and the countries in Asia are mad at us for this. So we're not helping our image on the world stage, already launching an illegal war like this, and then inflicting this much economic pain on the global market, thanks to the Iranians closing the Strait of Hormuz and us being unwilling to even negotiate with them. This is obviously not a good look at all. And the administration has been unwilling to give an inch at all. And they're still claiming that Iran is on the verge of capitulating. They're still claiming they want to negotiate very badly. They called them up today and they want to negotiate very badly. No evidence of this. Evidence to the contrary. Statements from the Iranians themselves saying, we don't want to negotiate. We've cut all contact with them. We're just in the business of establishing deterrence at this point. So what are we supposed to take away from this? Blatant lies, blatant mischaracterizations of the situation. There's an unwillingness across the board to just recognize reality at all, economically, militarily. Nobody is even willing to express the slightest bit of humanity or like emotion or signs of life. They're all mindless zombies. in this administration. Every last one of them. They all repeat the same multiple lines because they're told from the top, this is what you must say. We'll get into the clips from Pete Hegseth here in a second, because it's just like he's literally programmed with a few lines to say whenever he's asked a tough question. He can't go off script for at risk of, who knows, being punished. I don't know. But he's forced to repeat these same mindless lies that anybody with a brain can understand are mindless. That every time he's asked a question about specifics about the Iranians' ability to strike our bases in the region, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, and that was the point of this war, and that's been achieved. Okay, well, have all the objectives been achieved? Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. Okay, well, what about the missiles that just struck the base in Jordan and killed 3 of our troops? Iran will never have a nuclear... Like, it's just a lack of three-dimensional thinking at all. They're just unwilling to even engage with any serious inquiries about the wisdom behind this war or any of their decisions throughout it. Now, we'll end off here by just going over this situation from over the past couple days. Multiple U.S. troops died in the Middle East in this war that is totally pointless. And this, let me just say this from the outset. One of the people killed was a 19-year-old girl. Just, we all need to be able to recognize this just base foundational, like, humanity here. What sane government would send the 19-year-old girl to go die in a conflict based on lies and conducted at the behest of a foreign country? That is the most sickening thing I think I've ever heard. I mean, it's unbelievable that that's socially accepted. Let me just say that right away. How is that acceptable? How is there not a massive uproar over this? That anybody with that much of a future ahead of them would be sent to go die in this war based on total lies. That is entirely at the feet of the Trump administration and whoever else is responsible for these people, any of them, being over there. We should not be in the Middle East. Every last one of the troops that is over there sitting in a base as a sitting duck to Iranian missiles, which can touch all of the bases in the Middle East, and sitting there without any real supply of defensive systems. We're very short on defensive systems in the Middle East. There's very few to go around. So the troops that are still sitting in the bases in Jordan and Iraq and any of these Gulf states, any of the bases that haven't been totally destroyed over the course of this war, what are they still doing there? Get them out of there. They are literally sitting ducks, and this stupidity results in the needless death of people with so much ahead of them. People with families back home, young people, people with kids, people with wives and husbands back home, with entire futures ahead of them. It results in them dying needlessly. And we'll show you the clip in a minute from Pete Hegseth, but it is just sickening that people this unstable and without humanity are in charge of this. But as this relates to the war, this just showcases again that Pete Hegseth has been lying this entire time. Pete Hegseth, and we'll play the clips, Pete Hegseth has been saying for months that the Iranian the military in Iran has been totally defeated. They've been obliterated. He's used these very colorful words to describe the damage that's been inflicted on the Iranian regime, on their military, and the IRGC. They've been obliterated. They've been destroyed. They've been set back decades. They're on the verge of defeat. They're calling us up, begging to talk, begging to negotiate, begging for a peace deal. Okay, then wouldn't you expect, if this was the reality, if this was the world we lived in, where the Iranians were looking to cave and totally give us everything we wanted, wouldn't you, number one, expect the rhetoric to be a little bit calmer from their side? And number two, wouldn't you expect the behavior to be a little bit calmer? Wouldn't you expect them to not maybe go out of their way and kill our troops in the region? To bomb bases in Jordan and Iraq and the Gulf states and attempt to and succeed at killing our troops in the last couple days? Wouldn't you expect them to maybe take a step back? Wouldn't you expect them to not be militarily escalating and calling up the Houthis and telling them to block the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait to try and get another piece of leverage in this war? If Pete Hegseth was correct in his assessment and his explanation of the state of this war, in saying that the Iranians are on the verge of caving and that they've been totally militarily defeated, how is it possible then that missiles are still crashing into U.S. bases at this stage in the war? We're 5 months in, and we're supposed to believe from Pete Hegseth that the stockpile of missiles has been successfully degraded when the intelligence reports themselves are leaking to the press. That's not true. That's not true. And until just today and yesterday, this was reported in 2 separate outlets that the intelligence assessments of these strikes that we're conducting in Iran on their missile supplies, on their missile launchers on their coast, it says it's very unlikely that these are doing anything to damage the will of the Iranians, to anything to damage their ability to control the strait. So nothing we're doing is succeeding, at least as what we're doing right now, with these limited strikes on the southwest portion of the country. And everything we've done up to this point has not degraded their missile stockpiles or their drone stockpiles or their will to fight on. So what are we talking about here when Pete Hegseth says this military has been defeated? How is it possible then that they're still killing our troops? Here is Pete Hegseth going back and forth with John Ossoff from Georgia. And this is the other problem, by the way. They're making the worst people in the world look correct because they are every word that comes out of John Ossoff's mouth right here, the Democrat from Georgia, who is wrong on like everything else, he is entirely correct in everything he says in this entire exchange. So that's also the cost. They're hurting themselves by doing this. If the goal was in these midterms to maintain majorities in the House and Senate, obviously that's out the window. That's not going to happen with a performance like this. So here's John Ossoff correctly and totally justifiably pressing Pete Hegseth on his inability to answer the simplest questions about statements he made a couple months ago, saying that Iran was totally defeated. Take a look.
On day 14 of this conflict, Mr. Secretary, day 14, nearly 5 months ago, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. That was on day 14 of the war. Was that an accurate statement?
They didn't have a Navy any longer. It was completely sunk. Their missiles were buried underneath a lot of their underground facilities, and their defense industrial base has been almost completely destroyed. So as far as a military assessment of Iran's capabilities, it didn't mean by any stretch of the imagination absolute zero, but their capabilities
Mr. Secretary,
at the lowest level
you
they've
stated
been in a very
that
long time.
on day 14 of this conflict, in the second week of the conflict, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Was that an accurate statement? Yes or no?
Iran's ability to challenge the United States of America at the level at which we're capable of.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Secretary. You said on day 14 Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Yes or no? Was that an accurate statement?
What the American military has done to the
question?
Iranian military is a historic military
Will you
defeat,
answer the
and
question
they're ineffective
under oath?
in that context.
3 weeks later, you declared victory. That was now nearly 4 months ago. 3 weeks after you'd already said Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, you said, quote, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. You said Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. And you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Were those accurate statements?
It certainly was, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, a historic military victory over Iran.
Had Iran's military been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come? That was a statement that you made 4 months ago.
They had 160 naval vessels
You need
in
to
the Blue Water
answer the questions,
Navy,
Mr.
and they're gone.
Secretary.
Their Air Force is completely combat ineffective, and they don't have a defense industrial base. So describe to me a country that doesn't have an Air Force, a Navy, or a defense industrial base, and I will describe to you a country that does not have an effective military. It can lob missiles.
Mr. Secretary, you stated 4 months ago that Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. Has Iran's military been, for the last 4 months, combat ineffective?
It's been set back not just years, but likely decades.
You stated we had, quote,
build at the level it did before, and not even close. It doesn't mean it doesn't have capabilities.
Mr. Secretary, you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Was that an accurate statement 4 months ago?
The main objective of this was to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Their main sites were obliterated. We're watching over them, and we're holding them at issue. If they don't give them up at the table, there's other ways we can take them away.
Early in the conflict
Iran will
on
never
day
have a
3,
nuclear
Mr.
weapon.
Secretary, early in the conflict, day 3, you said one of those core objectives was to, quote, destroy the missile threat. And as you restated on day 5, to, quote, obliterate Iran's missiles and drones. Those were clearly and repeatedly stated core objectives of the campaign, which 4 months ago you declared had been completed victoriously with every single objective achieved. Were those objectives achieved 4 months ago?
No one ever stated that every single missile was gone. Ultimately, combat ineffective means they're not able to dig them out of their UGFs and shoot
Had
at
the
us.
missile
It
threat
doesn't mean they
been
don't have
defeated 4
underground
months
facilities
ago?
where they put missiles in them and hold on to them because they're the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. So we never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is at scale against an opponent like the United States of America, which went toe-to-toe with them and Iran couldn't.
You stated on March 8th, day 9 of the war on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction?
Ultimately, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon to threaten the United States of America. That has been the objective, and it remains so.
So just to review, you will not answer whether your statement made on the 14th day of the war that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and made combat ineffective was a truthful statement to the American people as you sit here and ask for tens of billions more for the conflict.
Senator's time has
Had a
expired.
historic and effective military campaign against the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Won't
and
answer
will
the
ensure they
question.
never
Senator
get a nuclear
Peters.
weapon, Senator.
Now, in another turn of events, which is just a sign of how badly this war has gone, where even the most crazed supporters of endless war are against this conflict at this point, Mike Johnson, the other day in a press pool, said that he would like to see this war wrap up before the midterms. And Senator John Kennedy, a major Trump ally, major backer of all the nominees back during the nomination process, John Kennedy pressed Dan Kane and Pete Hegseth yesterday in this hearing to get straight answers because he acknowledged, as the rest of the world did during this hearing, that these people are acting like programmed robots and are unable to answer the simplest questions about this very important issue, this war in Iran. They're not willing to be human beings in this hearing and answer these questions in a straightforward way. These very important questions for the fate of the world. They're playing games. They're trying to play political games. They're calling senators, telling them they have TDS. They're telling senators they have TDS during this hearing. The most unserious language ever to be used in a hearing about a war, an active war that's going on. He's throwing out the term Trump derangement syndrome. Like, is this a joke? This is John Kennedy correctly pressing them for a straight answer to anything that's been asked. Take a look.
Some of my colleagues, General, want America to just stop in Iran. End the blockade, bring all of our warriors home. What would be the consequences of that, in your estimation?
Sure. I think termination criteria is always a political decision. However, I assess that Iran will continue to be a challenge moving forward. So we have to be thoughtful
Will
about
they
that.
put tolls on the strait?
I don't know, sir. That's a decision that's a hypothetical and will depend on what happens
It's not
in the future.
hypothetical. We've got a blockade to stop them.
We do, sir. That's
General,
putting
I want you
economic
to look me in
pressure
the
on
eye.
Iran.
I'm not asking you for, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I know your advice to the president is private, but this is serious as 4 heart attacks and a stroke. Now, what happens if we come home and end the blockade to the world?
Sir, Iran has the potential to continue to be a threat, and we will need to prepare military
Will they
options to
toll
do
the
that.
strait?
Sir, that's a hypothetical question, and I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, it's not hypothetical. We come home. It's not going to be hypothetical. You know that, General, and I do too. And I appreciate your discretion, but we're down to it. We need some hard answers and some straight talk. What'll happen, Pete?
Senator, I would agree with the chairman, but the likely outcome is they would try to impose their will on the waterways in ways that the world would not like. Call it a toll, call it a fee, call it an exchange, call it control. They would do something that they would try to hold it at issue. Yes, sir.
Would they try to commence development again of a nuclear warhead?
Part of the reason President Trump had to have the courage to do what he did after Midnight Hammer is that they didn't give up their ambitions even though their nuclear sites had been obliterated. So this is a regime hell-bent on nuclear ambitions, and
Guys,
President Trump's been willing to go after
answers. We need straight answers. Do we have the ability to destroy whatever is underneath Pickaxe Mountain?
Senator, a lot of our capabilities are classified, but if anybody in the world can reach anything on God's green earth, it's the United States military, the most powerful military in the world. It's all about options and trade-offs.
Now, this is the last clip I'll show you, and it's the most enraging one. Pete Hegseth, as he has been known to do in these hearings, decides to stand on the soapbox and tell everybody that is criticizing this war that you're criticizing the troops and that they're being unpatriotic, which is always the fallback whenever you have nothing else to say in defense of a war. You call those criticizing it unpatriotic and unsupportive of the country, which really just means you're not a slave to the president. That's what he means. He tells Gary Peters here that by criticizing him and his conduct in the war and how this war has been conducted and the fact that this war was started at all without a plan, as it was, by saying anything as basic and as commonly agreed upon as that, he is engaged in slander of the troops. So, again, I said this last time. We went over a Pete Hegseth hearing a month or two ago, in April, I believe, when he had his first hearing about this war in Iran. He used this exact same trick on anybody who criticized the war. He would turn it around on them and say, "You're criticizing the troops. How dare you? You're a traitor to this country." He said, I believe last time he used the word traitor. When Pete Hegseth says that this senator is a traitor, this senator is speaking out against the troops, he's slandering the fallen. When Pete Hegseth used charged language like this to describe the senator's complaints about the war, saying he's belittling the service of the troops, like this weasel, Pete Hegseth, using the troops as human shields against his incompetence. When Pete Hegseth says this, he's saying it not about only the senator, but about everybody else in this country who's criticized this war. Me, you, all of people, everyone watching this who agrees with me. He's calling all of us traitors to the country. He's saying all of us are slandering the troops. He is literally such a weasel, such a small person, that he would use the troops to deflect from his own incompetence. That's the person we have running the Defense Department right now. Oh, I'm sorry, the War Department. Take a look at Pete Hegseth.
The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war, and it still remains closed. And of course, tragically, service members, our warfighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying. So what's different? Mr. Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think it smears the sacrifice of the troops that are out there making on behalf of the American people to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Is the nuclear material still there,
I can get you a ticket out to CENTCOM and talk to what those Americans are doing, and how committed they are to this effort, and how they want to ensure that Iran never threatens their families with a nuclear weapon. That's the kind of intensity that our warfighters have about making sure that Iran isn't capable of doing that.
Secretary Hegseth, if you listen to my comments, you would have heard me say how amazing our warfighters are.
I heard failure. And the word heard, I heard exactly what you said.
I will tell you how I use the word failure, because I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership. You don't have a strategy. You don't have a long-term plan to actually win this war. Win the war. The men and women are going to be able to do it, but they need to have leadership. When will you show leadership? Of course we have leadership. When will you show leadership? Why don't you show some leadership and stand up to your fellow Democrats who won't fund the troops, who stand and play partisan politics while you don't give us the money? You want to stand up here and talk about the troops? You won't show any political courage to actually fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator. Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion, you're asking for $1.5 trillion. It's not a question of money, it's a question of leadership and understanding what it takes to actually win.
Political cowardice of Democrats who won't fund the troops.
Now, obviously, just a disgusting display from Pete Hegseth there, like just an incredibly weak, despicable person. But there's a reason to all of this. Let's just not pretend that he's too dumb to understand why he's doing this. He might be dumb and incompetent, but he's not that dumb to where he doesn't understand that he's not answering the question that's being asked of him. Pete Hegseth and the rest of the administration, when they give these long-winded responses, these morally superior responses, criticizing and condemning anybody that dares to question the war as unpatriotic and un-American, there's a reason they're doing this, and it's just the same reason. It's probably much worse than when the Bush administration would do the same thing. the reason for this is because they're in so far over their skis in this conflict. None of them have any clue. They don't have the slightest clue of what they are doing in this. This is all ad hoc. There's no plan here. They're just doing things on a fly. Trump says something and then it's done the same day, and then they retreat from that position that afternoon. They change their positions on a whim. And this is what they've done with everything, obviously, with the tariffs, with the immigration policy, all of it. But it's to another level during this conflict. Positions that are taken at 10 a.m. are switched by 2 p.m. There's no steady plan in all of this. It's completely on the fly. It's governance by Truth Social. There's no consistent ideology. There's no consistent plan. There's no consistent objectives being laid out. Every day it changes. It changed from the start of this war to now. At first, it was all these plans, this massive wish list of things they wanted to accomplish. And now it's just about getting the Strait of Hormuz back. And this one-liner, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. This is how dwindled this whole thing has become, to where we're scraping for the bottom of the barrel for all of this. We're trying to get the tiniest little wins that they can get and claim that they're master successes of foreign policy. They're so far, and just like, you can look this up yourself. Look at the leaks that have been made in Axios and the New York Times, in the Washington Post. Just go back and look throughout this entire conflict at the leaks from the Pentagon, from the administration, from the White House itself. People are leaking to the press that they have no clue what they are doing. They have no idea what's going on. They don't know what the next steps are. They don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. They have no plan at all, and they're conducting this insane, reckless war for Israel, which was admitted on like day 3 by the Secretary of State. This is done because Israel was going to do it themselves if we didn't, and put our troops at risk if we didn't step in and do it with them. That's Rubio's own words. And because we know a long history here of Israel trying to drag us into this war, so we have the context around this. Because of all that, we have now entered this reckless war without a plan, without any clear objectives, and we're risking our. And this is the most. I'll put a picture of this up right now on the screen. Trump tweeted out on Truth Social comparing a bunch of wars. This is how like detached they are in the White House from what the reality of the situation is. Trump put on Truth Social a list of a couple wars. I believe it was Vietnam, Iraq, or Korea, and this latest in Iran. And how long they went on and how many people died in them. He is bragging. Donald Trump is bragging about the 18 dead people in this war because he thinks that's relatively low. He's saying we should be thankful to him because this war has only gone on 5 months and only 18 people have died. We should be saying thank you, Donald Trump, for getting us into this war and only letting it go on for 5 months and only getting 18 people needlessly killed in a war based on lies for a foreign country. Thank you so much. That's what he wants us to genuinely tell him. Like, this is another universe of insanity that they exist within. That's totally detached. Trump said yesterday as well that nobody's against this war. I just read a poll where 80% of the people are for this war. He is literally in a bubble, protected by Susie Wiles, protected by Stephen Miller, of people that only tell him what he wants to hear. And he gets no information that is contrary to what he would like to hear. He doesn't, I genuinely at this point believe he may not know how bad this war is playing in the public, how disastrously the polling is on this war. A poll came out from The Economist 2 days ago. This war is the least popular war since polls on wars were created. It's -30 in the polling. Nobody likes this war. Nobody. And Donald Trump genuinely believes that the vast majority of people love this war. The economic pain, we're willing to sacrifice it. The Republicans losing in the midterms, that's just something that has to happen according to them. They don't care about it. Why should we? He has no idea. His people craft the perfect media narrative, the perfect media diet for him to digest so that he can believe that this war is playing well to the public. It's genuinely insane. And this is the people dictating policy on this war, which isn't going well. And there's no sign that it will get better. And the economy is teetering on the edge of collapse. Globally, I'm talking about, with the oil shortage. And there's not a single rational voice in the room when decisions are being made. You have Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance is nowhere to be found at all. So there's not a single rational person making decisions right now in this very high-stakes situation. So we'll see what happens. That's where we'll end it off for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to go down below and hit like and subscribe here on YouTube. And also go to my Instagram, X, Spotify, and Substack. And be sure to check out those 2 articles I had this week on antiwar.com and Mises.org. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
We must take back our cities and take back our culture and take back our country.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.